Okay, Jory's gonna be performing the one arm row.
I'm not ready.
It's okay. So basically she wants to pretend like she's a tabletop, so everything's going to be in line. Her tailbone, her shoulder, and the back of her head. So put your head down a bit. And her hips should be parallel with her foot. And she doesn't want her elbow to come past her shoulder. So during her concentric phase, again, the joints that are changing angles, shoulder joint, girdle, and elbow joint. Concentric phase, her shoulder joint is going through extension, her shoulder girdles are retracting, and her elbow joint is flexing. And eccentric, again, her shoulder joint is going through flexion, her shoulder girdle protraction, and elbow joint extension. Next, Jory's going to be performing chest flies. So she's going to be supine on her back. Her points of contact with the bench is the back of her head, her shoulders, and her tailbone. Feet are going to be flat on the ground, parallel. She's going to start with her arms up, slightly bent. Her lowering phase, which is the eccentric phase, her shoulder joint is going to be performing horizontal abduction, and her lifting phase, which is concentric, her shoulder joint is going to be performing horizontal adduction. Next, Jory's going to be performing a wide grip pull-up. She's going to step up on the machine with one knee at the time, and that's her wide grip. Alright, so joints that are changing angles, shoulder joint, shoulder girdle, and elbow joint. Through her concentric lifting phase, her shoulder joint is going to perform adduction, her shoulder girdle is going through retraction and depression, and her elbow joint is flexion. Through her eccentric phase, shoulder joint is performing abduction, shoulder girdle is performing protraction and elevation, and elbow joint is going through extension. Next, Jory's going to be performing a narrow grip chin up, same setup as the pull-ups, one knee at a time. And there's her narrow grip with the supine or supinated grip. So her concentric phase, her shoulder joint is going through extension, shoulder girdle, again, retraction and depression. Elbow is going through flexion. Eccentric phase, her shoulder joint is going through flexion, shoulder girdle, protraction, elevation, and elbow joint is going through extension. Next, Jory is going to be performing bent over row. Her setup, she's going to have her feet hip width apart. Her shoulders are going to be slightly over her hips. And if I were to have a dowel on her back, the point of contact is going to be the back of her head, her shoulder, and her tailbone. She's going to, whenever she's lifting, she's going to make sure her elbows don't go past her shoulders. So joints that are changing angle, shoulder joint, shoulder girdle, elbow joint. Through Jory's concentric phase, her shoulder joint is going through extension. Her shoulder girdle is going through retraction, and her elbow is going through flexion. Eccentric, shoulder joint is going through flexion, shoulder girdle, protraction, and elbow joint extension. Next, Jory is going to be performing the lateral shoulder raises. Her setup's going to be feet hip width apart and parallel, and she's going to have soft knees. Her joints that are changing angle are her shoulder joint. Through her concentric lifting phase, she's going to be performing abduction, and through her lowering eccentric, it's going to be adduction.
So Bree's going to be performing a bench press. She's going to put her hands on the bar in a pronated grip, slightly further than the shoulders. Her points of contact is going to be the back of her head, the back of her shoulders, her tailbone, and her feet are going to be planted flat. The joints that are changing angle is her shoulder and her elbow joints. In the lowering phase, her shoulder joint is performing horizontal abduction, and her elbows are in flexion. In the lifting phase, she's performing horizontal adduction, and in the lifting phase, her elbow joints are in extension. Bree is going to be performing a seated cable row. She's going to make sure her feet are planted flat on the surface. When she pulls back, she's going to make sure that her elbows don't go past her shoulders. In her concentric phase, her shoulder joint is performing an extension, her shoulder girdle is in retraction, and her elbow joint is in flexion. In her eccentric phase, her shoulder joint is in flexion, her shoulder girdle is in protraction, and her elbow joint is in extension. Bree is going to be performing horizontal rows. She's going to have her feet in dorsiflexion, her hands in a pronated grip, slightly wider than shoulder width. As she rises up, she's going to keep her back as straight as she can. In her concentric phase, her shoulder joint is in extension, her shoulder girdle is in retraction, and her elbow joint is in flexion. In her eccentric phase, her shoulder joint is performing flexion, her shoulder girdle is protracting, and her elbow joint is in extension. So Bree's going to be performing a push-up. She wants her hands directly underneath her shoulders. As she goes up on her toes, if you would put a dowel on her, you would want the points of contact to be her head, the back of her shoulders, and her tailbone. In the lowering phase of her push-up, her elbow joint is performing flexion, and her shoulder joint is performing horizontal abduction. In the lifting phase of her push-up, her shoulder joint is performing horizontal adduction, and her elbow joint is performing extension. Bree is going to be performing a frontal shoulder raise, her feet planted flat on the floor with soft knees facing parallel. In her lifting phase, her shoulder joint is performing flexion. In her lowering phase, her shoulder joint is performing extension. Bree is going to be performing a shoulder press with her feet hip-width apart, planted on the floor, with soft knees. In her lifting phase, her shoulder joint is performing abduction, and her elbow joint is in extension. On her lowering phase, her shoulder joint is in abduction, and her elbow joint is in flexion.